Welcome back to In Light of the Gospel. My name is Dan Blatz, and today I'm having a conversation with the director of Answers in Genesis Canada. Most of you are well aware of the Ark Encounter and the Creation Museum down in Kentucky, and Answers in Genesis Canada is an extension of that. Cal Smith is the founder and the director of it, and he does all the videos on the YouTube channel, and he does speaking engagements all around the country, and he's very well versed in evolution, the theories of evolution, the science behind it, and he debunks it so casually, so matter-of-factly, so scientifically that it seems pretty hard to argue with. Today we talk about his life story, how he was raised and how he came to faith, but also we talk about a recent series of videos he's doing forcing AI like Grok and ChatGPT to answer questions based on reason, logic, scientific observational science and mathematics, and then he forces it into those parameters and makes it answer questions. And it has to admit that creation is much more logical, much more plausible than evolution ever could be. So I hope you get a lot out of this. First of all, in the power of the gospel and the power of the authority of the Word of God to transform a life like Cal Smith into who he is today, but also that you would have the tools and the confidence to know that God's word is sure, that we don't need to be intimidated by consensus science so-called, falsely so-called, that we can rest assured that the word of God is true and we can take it to the bank. So I appreciate you coming around. I think you'll be very blessed by today's conversation. I know I was. So thanks again, and God bless you. Well, it's a great honor for me to have you here. I appreciate it very much. Some people might be a little surprised that we would even be associated, and probably even more surprised by how we are associated.
Yeah.
Most people might not know this about Cal Smith, is not only is he the director and kind of the face of Answers in Genesis Canada, but he could probably choke out or break the arm of pretty much anybody walking around on the street. I've been learning Jiu-jitsu from Cal here for the last almost 2 years now. We were thinking about it yesterday. September we started 2 years ago.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, so that's how we kind of got to know each other.
And your whole family too. It's amazing. All the kids coming down.
Yeah. There's been moments where we're like, hey, this is cool. We're learning some stuff. There's times where we're like, I don't know why we do this. We should just give up.
Yeah. It's kind of a bizarre activity. I've always found jiu-jitsu, though, it's been, and you must notice this, and probably the kids as well. It stimulates your mind in kind of a different way than most martial arts did. I did striking years ago, and Taekwondo was popular in the 80s and stuff like that, and got my black belt. But I found Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. You wake up at 2 a.m. and you're like, oh, I should have done this.
My wife has done a fair bit of research into brain development and people even perhaps who have brain deficiencies.
Right.
And there's these movements that you can do that look silly and non-productive, but apparently they make connections in the brain. And she comes down and she watches us even do shrimping, where you're taking this leg and moving this way, and this is all doing something in the mind, right?
I talked to someone about child development, and even the way kids crawl and stuff, and they were making the same type of connection between proper brain development and stuff like that. So I think it's pretty useful, and probably Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu as well. You don't have that massive concussion problems and things like that. I think people are more aware now, right? People getting their heads smacked around and stuff like that. So I think it's a great sport, a great art.
I still get injured all the time. I'm always hurting, sore constantly.
Well, you have a tendency to have like two gears, neutral and full blast. So
I'm working on it. Yeah.
Anyway.
But anyway, your Answers in Genesis Canada, you kind of you were doing apologetics and creation type ministry for many years prior to that.
Yeah.
And then you kind of joined forces with Answers in Genesis US and started the Canadian branch.
I'd stepped back from the ministry that I'd been with for about 15 years. I didn't really even know where I was going. And so I got together with a friend of mine, Joe Boot, from Toronto. We were having lunch, and he mentioned that someone from Answers in Genesis had just contacted him. The reason for the contact is they knew Joe was well known in Canada, that he would likely know a Christian lawyer, and they were looking to establish a foothold here in Canada, get charitable status, that type of thing. And so he said, well, would you like me to put you in contact with him? I said, yeah, great. And so it was a natural fit. I went down, I met with Ken and the team, and talked about it, and then went down 2 weeks later. That was really relaxing. They wanted to know whether I could actually, speak on the subject and stuff. So I'm in a boardroom, maybe maybe 4 or 5 times as big as the room we're in here. And, Ken's sitting there and a couple of the other speakers, and they're like, go ahead, do a talk. I was like, there's a monitor behind me. And I'm like, this bead of sweating. I mean, Ken's the reason why I even
then preaching to the choir, right?
Exactly. And so anyway, something must have been okay.
Yeah,
and
yeah.
here I am. But the ministry's been going for about 8 years now.
When you look on the YouTube channel, it looks like it's taken on a kind of a face of its own. Answers in Genesis Canada. Like you've got a video that has 4 million views.
No, about 3, I think 3.1 or something like that. Yeah, is our highest one. But see, the video production was kind of the silver lining through the whole COVID debacle, right? Yeah. Within the first 2 weeks, after 2 weeks to flatten the curve, so to speak, I lost something like 4 major conferences because things just started collapsing, right? Obviously, in-person meetings and stuff like that just trickled down to a standstill. And so I gathered my team. We're still kind of a fledgling ministry here in Canada, especially if you take out 3 years of COVID. And I just said, well, we are now a social media and video production ministry until such time as we are.
Instead of doing too many guest speaking engagements?
Well, we just had to, right? If you're going to do outreach. And so we switched to that. And then fairly quickly, we started, I just kind of stumbled into this, what we call internally a feature video. Which is kind of like a mini documentary style video. If you go to the Answers in Genesis Canada YouTube channel, I think we do video production a little bit differently than a lot of people, even especially Christian ministries. We're always trying to add some kind of storytelling element, and we spend a lot of time on sets and things like that, just to make it a little more engaging.
Yeah.
I think these kinds of conversations are very, very fruitful. But, there's several of them out there as well. And we wanted to do something just a little different.
And if you want to get like this really clear, concise information into people's hearts and minds, some crazy title and thumbnail.
Yeah.
It's not just clickbait. It's actually like, we're going to really talk and break down this issue talk about it. And so the thing that kind of brought me back around to you had offered like a year ago or so to come on my channel.
Yeah.
And now you put out these Grok ones. And that the whole Grok and Chat GPT thing has intrigued me quite a bit because it's a pretty useful tool. If I'm trying to put information together, here's my thoughts. Can you kind of order this and put it in chronological, readable material? And a lot of really neat things that way.
Yeah.
But you really showed in those videos how biased it can be and how it's consensus driven, right? Like whatever.
Yeah, I think that's the main reason I wanted to put it out there. I mean, there's a lot of contention, even in our ministry, about the use of AI, because AI can be a great tool, but it can mess up as well. I've done an extensive deep dive into AI over the last 6 weeks, and I've had it hallucinate. That's what they call it, AI hallucinations, where they just make up completely bogus claims. It'll actually say, "Oh yeah, go to Nature magazine, 1979 issue. This." It'll give a title. It'll give a quote. You look it up.
It's not there.
It's not there.
Is that right?
Yeah. So you can enter into these conversations, and for some reason the algorithms just mess up and stuff. So I always tell people, don't go to AI as a source of knowledge. It's a useful tool. It can help me find some things, and then I'll go research and make sure the stuff is accurate. But I did want to expose the bias, because really, when I first started looking into it, there was an email sent to the U.S. office from some young gal. I think she was from Korea. And someone had referred her to an apologetics book, a Christian apologetics book. And as she wrote her email, she said, "So I decided to check with ChatGPT, and here's what it said." And then, she listed the thing, and it was kind of a hit piece on this particular thing. And then she said at the bottom, "Well, so why should I, go trust your source here if it was so easily dismantled?"
Exactly.
Well, the entire premise is I went to ChatGPT. What does that mean? Well, that means she's got a lot of trust in ChatGPT, whatever it says. And then when it, tried to dismantle the arguments from the book, she concluded, well, if this AI can take apart your arguments, it must be, So we know, especially young people are using these tools just like they used Google and things like that beforehand. But so in my discussions with it, whatever topic it is, whether it's age of the earth or fossils or, DNA or whatever, I always get it to conclude what it concludes, and then at the end say, okay, if I was a first-time user, and we'd never had this discussion.
I want to point that out because it's almost like you finally get the perfect atheist debate partner, and you can actually hold them to what they claim to believe.
Right.
You claim to believe in observational science, correct? Absolutely. Every scientist out there would say, yes, I do, 100%.
Yeah.
And you are okay with using actual mathematics, and you're going to stick to, observational stuff that you can prove, and then give us a number, give us a basic percentage of what's the chances of something happening. Can we do that? Yeah. Yes. And then you start talking and you prove your point, and they jump back to consensus science or, scientists agree. Yeah. But with this thing, you can actually force it to say, stick to these parameters.
Right.
And then it has to answer logically based on science and reason.
And I've even had people in the comments criticize it and say, well, see, he's forcing it to say this or that.
Exactly.
And it's just like, well, I'm sticking to math, logic, and observational science. Isn't that what scientists are supposed to? Isn't that the gold standard? I did one recently after the Grok series. People challenged me in the comments saying, well, ChatGPT would put you through it tougher. So I just completed 3 the other day.
Okay.
And it's Chat with Chad. From ChatGPT, because you can choose different voices.
Oh, nice.
So there's one called Chad, and he really is a Chad. He's this smooth talking kind of guy. So if you saw my Grok ones, of course, we made that kind of hologram. Yeah. Well, we've got a hologram now of Chad. And one of the episodes, I'm talking about human-chimp DNA similarity. And so I get it to go through from the early 2000s where, it was very popular, commonly touted that humans and chimps share only a difference of maybe 1% to 2% difference in human-chimp similarity. And that became kind of a standard talking point for evolutionists. Well, today, that's down about 14.5%. So we've gone from supposed 1% to 2% difference down to at least a 14% difference. And of course, cats have a 90% similarity. So if you were going to use the argument that the closely...
they like chimps because they look something similar.
Right. But you would have to, if it's strictly with the similarity argument, you'd have to say we evolved from cats, and nobody's saying that, of course. And then again, I go through the whole exercise, and at the end I say, okay, treat me like a first-time user. And if someone asked you, what the common or what the strongest evolutionary arguments are for us evolving from a common ancestor to chimps and humans, and it quotes the 98% similarity.
Interesting.
Just right after I'd already got it to conclude, well, okay, a 2025 Nature article has peer-reviewed, scientific, evolutionary-based, has admitted, there's a 14.5% difference, and it reverts right back to the consensus science.
That's where you can really start to see the deception. Even like during COVID, we kept hearing trust the science, and then you'd hear these crazy numbers, and then people touting information that we knew was already debunked and was untrue.
Yep.
Scientists agree, doctors agree, but you keep touting that information anyway. And here in the videos, you hold them to the flame, so to speak, force them to say what's logical and scientific, and then say, okay, now revert back to your standard process and answer like you would answer anyone. Right. And it goes right back to the consensus-based.
And really, what I'm showing is, well, consensus, what is that? Well, in your local public schools, in your universities, what you're seeing on Dora the Explorer, or what you're watching on Jurassic Park, it doesn't matter. These evolutionary ideas are being promoted across the board throughout the Western world, have been done so now for generations. Yep. No wonder, me growing up, not going to church, my family didn't go to church, I'd never read the Bible, all that kind of stuff. What do you think I thought by the time I was 13 about the big questions in life? Well, we evolved from pond scum over billions of years, and why wouldn't I believe that?
And why question it?
Right. If I go to school and they're teaching me math and 2 + 2 is 4, and they're teaching me over here in science that we evolved from chemicals, okay. As a child, I couldn't tell the difference. And then after a while, I got to the point where if I detected that you questioned evolution somehow, I was like, they don't really understand science, or you know what I mean.
You don't believe 2 and 2 are 4.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah, very much so.
How did you grow up? Where were you raised?
Well, all over the place. The reason for that, my dad was a diamond driller, which is mineral exploration. Basically, you punch holes in the ground, you retrieve core, and then the geologists figure out whether they want to make a mine or not. Right?
Okay.
So core retrieval was basically it. So my dad was highly intelligent, man, like super high intelligence. So he was kind of the guy you called in when everything else had failed and you needed to, it was like the movie Armageddon, Bruce Willis.
Yeah,
that was my dad. He was like the guy, who could get it done. So we lived in Africa, we lived in Panama, we lived in Cyprus, we lived all over Canada, and then eventually settled in Nova Scotia, which is where I met my wife. So yeah, in grade 8, well, it wasn't 5 different schools, but I started in one school, went to 3 different ones, and ended up at the same one that I'd started, all in 1 year.
Wow.
So that's how much travel and just because of his work, how much movement we had when I was younger. Yeah.
With your dad's intellectual mindset, did he have any religious views at all, or was he kind of atheistic?
He did. So my mom grew up in Newfoundland, highly religious community, right? But my folks had dabbled in the Jehovah's Witness kind of cult for a while, but by the time I was growing up, because I'm the youngest of 7, there was just none of that. None of that talk anymore. Never go to church, anything like that. And later on in life, my dad revisited that cult, and then kept asking questions, and finally got to the point where they couldn't answer his questions, and he rejected that. So. But yeah, as far as just like a religious environment or like going to church or anything like that, we just never did that by the time I was on the scene.
How about your family growing up? Would it have been a fairly moralistic family? Like you do the right thing, you're kind and generous, or?
Well, I'll be 59 in December, so I would say no in terms of any kind of do the right thing because of this book or these rules or anything like that. It was just the culture at that time. The culture itself was like, well, you don't hit girls and and all this kind of stuff, and you don't swear and all that stuff. But that was just the leftovers from the Christian kind of ethos that had been gradually eroded away, but that was still around. But I couldn't give you a backup as to why you were supposed to act that way or whatever. Even when I look at young people today and just the chaos, even in young people trying to get married and whether they should get married or, just in culture, I very much had it in my mind. Well, you're going to find a woman, you're going to get married, you're going to have kids. That was what you did. But that was
because it was still in the culture.
It was reflected in culture. It was reflected on the TV shows I watched and everything like that. But there was no undergirding or underpinning of, well, thus saith the Lord, because look at the word of God or anything like that. It was just, I had a very atheistic mindset because to me, evolution was fact and science, and belief in God was...
Interesting. Yeah. The book of Romans seems to indicate early on that though they reject God, they hold the truth and unrighteousness, right?
Yeah.
Was there any, you look back, was there any kind of recognition that there's a greater power, something more to life?
Yeah, I think you're always, trying to contemplate that. But I had an answer for the three big questions in life, Hebrews, it says those who, you need to believe he exists in order... right, and you need to know he rewards those, etc. And I just got to the point where I didn't really think God existed. If you've got a so-called scientific way to explain your existence, then when Romans says although they knew him, it's like even atheists like Richard Dawkins will admit that if you take a child, even from a culture such as Japan, which is highly atheistic in their thinking.
Okay.
A child up to about the age of 5, if you ask them simple questions about where everything came from, will indicate they believe, well, there must be something that created all this. But then you beat it out of them.
The naturalistic mindset has to be taught.
That's right. Because it does say past tense. For though they knew. It doesn't say.
Their foolish heart was darkened.
That's right. It doesn't say although they know him, right? So I try to remind people that when I was very atheistic in my thinking and believed in evolution wholeheartedly, I wasn't going to bed at night going, well, I really know God exists, but I'm just going to tell people. No, I actually bought into the whole thing.
How about conscience? Like most of the people that I interview are old colony Mennonites, like plain Mennonite kind of people, and they go to bed terrified at night sometimes because their conscience is plaguing them over something that they did. They know better and they don't do it, right?
Yeah.
And they're not holding to what they know is right. So everybody has a conscience, even atheists.
Yep.
Did you deal with guilt and struggle with that kind of thing?
I definitely did. Again, the culture had taught me, well, you're not supposed to lie and cheat and steal and all these kind of things. And of course, you eventually your sin nature takes over and you do those things. So I recognized, when I got the gospel shared with me, I recognized, I am hypocritical. I don't want people to lie to me, but I've lied to people. I could see that in myself. But until I was actually confronted with and actually had these stumbling blocks with evolution broken down, that I was even able to consider God, right? So it was definitely a process, because as long as I had that way to counter, God probably doesn't even exist.
It satisfied your intellect and
and then you can just justify, because that's the way the atheist will justify it anyway. Well, we have these thoughts and all that stuff, and that was just provided through our evolutionary upbringing, and they provide a survival benefit because you want to have a cohesive society, and all their arguments and things.
Interesting.
Like that.
But we see even like prominent atheists. You look back on someone like Joe Rogan, who for years just lambasted Christianity and called it a ridiculous myth. He's changed his tune significantly in recent years. Even just a couple days ago, he had this really rednecky, long hair, bearded guy on there. He's like an ultra marathoner, and the guy just spent like an hour just talking about Jesus. And Joe is just taking it all in, right?
Yeah.
So he denied it for years, and it was satisfactory to his intellect for some time.
Yeah.
But it seems like as he started seeing the professionals and the sources of information kind of falling apart during COVID, now he's like, okay.
I think that's an interesting thing you've hit on a couple of times. People's trust in science has been degraded to a large degree over over the whole COVID scenario, because I think a lot of people could just see, well, wait a sec, this doesn't make sense. So you're telling me that I'm going to walk into a restaurant and have to wear a mask, but when I arrive at the table, I can now take it off.
All the scientists agree this is the right thing to do.
Yeah, like 6 feet apart. So I'm in my dollar store, and there's a row, and there's 4 cashiers. Now, while I'm in the lineup, I have to stay 6 feet apart. But when it's my turn to go in I can walk right by these 3 cashiers and the people in front of them, like this far. People were just like, this is goofy stuff, right? And it hadn't been tested. So I agree. I think there's a lot of people that kind of stood back and went, well, wait a sec. Maybe I don't just have to believe what the experts are telling me. I think this is indicative of what you're saying with a guy like Rogan. On the other hand, you can go to the other side of the ditch too, because take, for example, the flat earth movement. That belief in flat earth, there's more flat earthers today than there have been in history. Yeah. Why? Because you've got YouTube channels and people take a deep dive, and 12 hours later they believe that the earth is flat. So, trust in stuff like that. This is why I've always been of the mindset, I think we need to get back to equipping people, giving people a toolkit for thinking. You figure out what's best for you and your family. I'll figure out what's best for me and my family. I have an intellect. God's given me the capacity to think things through. I respect experts in their field, and all that stuff. But in the end, I don't have to bow to the expertise of a PhD who's telling me this, that, or the other thing. And that's why I think the Grok AI videos kind of really struck a chord with people, where they said, well, wait a sec, you're telling me if you know the questions to ask, you get this result. But if you don't know the questions to ask, you just tell me this. And that relates to what you were talking about with COVID. What the mainstream was telling you turned out to be bunk. And I think a lot of people's spidey sense was going off in the meantime.
But you figure by grade 7 and 8 or so, you were like pretty much an avid atheist, studying all the information, debunking belief in God regularly.
Yeah, and it wasn't so much a programmed attack on God. It was just the logical outworkings. This is why it drives me crazy when I see Christians and they say, well, you can believe God used evolution to create. It's like, really? Because you sure don't find it in the Bible. I like to ask Christians, tell me your top 3 Bible verses that convinced you God used evolution over millions of years to create.
Oh, we didn't. No, we used logic and consensus science, and then we brought it into the Bible.
Exactly. So, why would you do that? Because we've been told all sorts of things over the years. For example, the gay gene. Remember when they were telling you that, people had homosexual tendencies because of certain genetics? Well, that's been debunked, of course. But for a while there, it was consensus science. So what did Christians that were, following that line of thought saying? They were repeating the same arguments.
Yeah.
So, the authority of the Word of God is the main message of the Answers in Genesis ministry. So I tell people about this with the whole AI thing because, man, some Christians are not really even understand. You're talking to a chatbot.
Yeah.
What you do. It's very sophisticated. It's got sophisticated logic algorithms and pattern recognition. It's very sophisticated. But, people sharing the gospel with AIs and stuff anyway, it's pretty crazy to hear some of the things. They don't really understand it, right? They think it's an artificial intelligence, like it's an actual intelligence. It's not.
A friend of mine that I just met recently, he lives down in Kentucky. Him and I were having this conversation, somewhat similar to this, and he was saying that if a scientist or a professional of some sort were to bring me a stack of evidence that clearly in his mind disproved what the Bible taught about this, that, or the other thing, take any topic you want.
Yeah.
I would, in my simple mind, say, I believe the Bible. I'll deal with your evidence later, whatever it might be.
Yeah.
But we know already now that evidence is not all actual evidence. And so we can hold firmly and believe that God is and that he's a rewarder of them that diligently seek him.
Yes.
And trust in his word alone. But what your ministry seems to be doing is not just saying, well, just believe God and forget proof, forget evidence. It's like, actually, no, that whole stack of evidence, this can be tossed, that can be tossed, this can be tossed. And here's the actual proof. Right?
Here's the specific way we deal with this issue. See, a lot of people would say, well, that's science denying. You're denying science, right? So you're unintellectual, etc. Here's the difference, and when I'm presenting, I try to use this analogy because here's the thing. There are two different types of science. Most people lump them all together, but there's two distinct types of science. So the type of science that is commonly appealed to is the type of science that gives us, well, you've got a camera here and you've got a computer and you've got microphones and we got medical technology and we have satellites and space shuttles and all these things and air conditioning. That's all great. That is technology that's accomplished through operational science.
Yep.
It's observable. It's repeatable. Yep. You set it up in a lab. You get the same results as long as you are using the same conditions. And I use the example of like temperature water boils out at sea level. Super simple. You want to do science, fill up the pot, stick it on the stove. If you're at sea level, 100 degrees Celsius every time. It doesn't matter whether you're a Hindu, an atheist, a Christian, it doesn't matter, right?
Yep.
Okay, so that's pure science. But then there's another type of science, historical science. And I always use the example of forensic science because that is historical science. So for example, if anybody's ever watched a CSI program or read an Agatha Christie novel or whatever like that, the premise is always the same. There's the dead body, and the investigators want to know what happened, but they didn't observe the crime. So they have to reconstruct a history to account for the results.
Right.
Now they'll go in and they'll start collecting facts. So they've got a hair follicle or a scrap of cloth or a blood sample, and they're going to do a DNA analysis or whatever the deal is. But they didn't observe it. They can't repeat the experiment over and over again. And so they have to make
They're still using hard evidence.
They have facts, but the facts have to be interpreted. You don't have to interpret what water boils at.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
You get the same result. So over here, you can't resurrect the person and shoot them again and try it again from different angles and stuff. So this is the type of science you're dealing with when you're talking about origins.
Right.
Creation, evolution,
Geology,
all that kind of stuff. There's so the point I always make with people is this: there isn't a fact that a creationist and an evolutionist can observe that we don't agree with. We all are all observing the exact same fact. So if you and I, let's say years ago, and I'm an evolutionist and you're a creationist, we walk up to a rock layer and there's a fossil in there. We go, wow, look, there's the remains of a dead thing. Yep. Do you agree? Yep. We both agree.
The fact is there.
But then the interpretations come out. And you say, yeah, I think that got put there in a big flood about 4,400 years ago. And I say, I think that's a dinosaur. So that was put there, got to be at least 65 million years old. Well, those are interpretations.
Yeah.
but it's the same fact.
And it's based on a theory of some sort then at that point.
Exactly, it's a bias. So, take, for example, my forensic science example. When it goes to court, the facts are the same. Everybody's looking at the same facts, but then they're going to be represented by two different, opinions. You've got a prosecutor, you've got a defense lawyer.
Yeah.
Now, prosecutors know which way they're going to argue about the facts even before they take the case, because they're prosecutors.
Yeah.
So they understand they're going to use all the facts here to prove that the defendant is guilty. Right? That's what their job is. And then, of course, the defense lawyer is going to interpret the exact same body of facts as evidence for the innocence of their client. They're actually paid by the client to be biased. So both parties here are biased. They're both looking at the same facts. They come to two different conclusions about history. Why? Because they're biased.
Yeah.
So if you're an atheistic materialist, of course you're going to interpret all the fossil evidence towards
But
evolution.
shouldn't then at that point the theories and the ideas that are coming together to prove one side or the other, shouldn't those be based on observational science then?
Well, and
we
they
see,
are,
like you did with the Grok geology video, like we know that fossils only get formed quickly. You can't form a fossil over millions of years. It has to have died quickly.
Right. So, and this is where the interpretive methods come in, and whatever gets popularized. So, I've had talks with Grok about, for example, Charles Lyell. It was in the about the 1830s that the whole concept of millions of years began to be popularized. And Charles Lyell was a person who really brought it to the forefront. Now, what's interesting about Charles, you look into the history, he was a professional lawyer. He was an anti-Christian. He was an amateur geologist, but he was Sir Charles Lyell. So when he visited Joggins, Nova Scotia, for example, and he also visited Niagara Falls, I mean, at the time, you weren't getting on planes and running back and forth. But he actually visited these places. He actually observed 30-foot tall tree-like plants extending through the sediments as they were like standing upright.
Each sediment representing some form, in their mind, millions of years perhaps.
This is the way he interpreted it, right? These layers get laid down slowly, but you've got a dead tree standing 30 feet tall. Well, obviously the entire organism had to be buried quickly in order to be made into a fossil.
Yeah.
But he also went to Niagara Falls, and he's looking at the Niagara Gorge, and he's thinking, okay, well, how much erosion? I mean, we know where it starts, and we know where it is now. He tried to determine how old it was. So he asked the locals, well, how much erosion takes place per year? You guys live here. They're like 4 to 6 feet. That didn't work for him.
That's too quick.
It's too quick. He went back home and said 1 foot per year. Why? Because it made it over 10,000 years old, which broke the biblical timeline, which is what he wanted to do.
Yeah.
And he reports it, and he's Sir Charles Lyell, and he's been to the place, and so everybody just goes, well, he must know what he's talking about.
Yeah.
Years later.
Just like Grok knows.
Exactly.
Sorry.
Yeah. No, and that's the whole thing. Most people just go to sources of authority. I say this to people all the time. How do you know what you know?
Yeah.
You know what you know because of what you got taught by authority figures and accepted.
All of us.
Right?
Yeah.
So it all comes down to authority. Is it the authority of the Word of God, the one that was there, who's revealed it to us, or the authority of man? And if you're trusting people like Charles Lyell, or you're trusting consensus science from ChatGPT, or whatever you're doing, you're putting your faith in the role of the experts. That's why I really think people need to take that back and to think God's given you a toolkit.
Yeah.
I have a heart for young people because I think it's such a confusing.
Well, that's where most of us feel unqualified or unfit to even enter into those conversations. It's all so intellectual and so highfalutin language where I can't even quite keep up with what they're saying, and they sound so sure.
Yeah.
So how can I ask questions? So when you come out and ask these parameter type of questions on the Grok videos, it really puts it into perspective. You just use real science.
Yeah, I think it's like most things, though. Probably first couple times you went to Brazilian Jiu-jitsu and they're using words like omoplata and kimura and stuff, and you're like, I don't know what this is. Well, some guy named Kimura liked that hold, and he tapped a lot of guys out, so it got called that. Well, in science, you hear a lot of Latin verbiage and all this stuff, and it is very confusing to someone. Australopithecus is proof of our evolution. Australopithecus, southern ape. it's
Not that complicated, but you have to know the lingo.
Right. It's like dinosaurs, right? So people have this idea about dinosaurs. They were just another creature that God created. They're extinct now. They're about 55% of the kinds that were placed on the ark have gone extinct now. So it's not just dinosaurs that have gone extinct, but people have this special idea about dinosaurs. Why? Well, Diplodocus, Brachiosaurus, Tyrannosaurus Rex. They're all these Latin verbiage. But if you say long neck, sharp tooth, spiky tail, giraffe,
one horn,
elephant, one horn, it starts to break that, right? But because we've been taught about dinosaurs a very specific way, and there's exotic plants, and
it's all done with a clear agenda.
Yeah.
So back to your story, in your teen years, you were kind of hook, line, sinker in with that theory.
Absolutely. Yeah. Very much so.
And you got married in that stage still
Yep.
too?
Yeah. I got saved. I already had 2 children, was already married. My wife, she had actually gone to university, so the same thing. She got indoctrinated with evolution. She had a Catholic background, but after university, the last vestiges of that were gone. She was fully committed to evolution as well. So yeah, I think
you went to university also?
I did not.
You didn't? Okay.
No. Sometimes people call me Dr. Smith. I'm like, well, I'm not a doctor.
Okay.
Yeah.
So when you finished high school, went straight into work?
Yeah. As a matter of fact, I never even finished high school. I went back years later and got a GED.
I did the same thing.
Yeah. Did you? Yeah. To me, school just got very, I don't know. I was bored, and I couldn't really see a value to it after a certain point. I love education in the concept of I love learning things.
Yeah, for sure.
I love deep diving into concepts and all that stuff. But the way it was done in a typical school, it just never really had an appeal to me.
Even then. Interesting.
I mean, obviously reading, writing, arithmetic, giving me a toolkit to say, yeah, I can do my taxes and I can write and all that stuff. But after a while, it was like, no, I want to study music. I want to study science. I want to study whatever, martial arts. And I think I can navigate those things. I guess the official term for what I do is called a polymath. I discovered that a couple of years ago. That's the term. So I like to study a variety of different things. And I think actually creationists, when you think about it, I have to know a certain amount of information about geology, biology, microbiology, obviously theology, logic, right? Like, all these things need to come together for me to make a presentation, And I think that's one thing Answers in Genesis has done very well. I know Ken Ham certainly did it for me. I was exposed to several creationists. Well, obviously to get saved, I had to have certain arguments presented to me, so it knocked out the evolutionary thinking. But it wasn't until I saw Ken, and I was sitting at home midweek. I must have been sick because I was never home. I was always working, and somebody had given me this DVD. It was called "Reclaiming the Culture" by Ken Ham. I didn't know what a Ken Ham was.
Okay.
And I popped in the DVD, and the way Ken systematically laid things out, I was just like, boom. It was like, it's what the Lord used to instill in me that I needed to speak about the topic.
I see. This was when you had already become a Christian.
Yes. Yeah, but it wasn't until I saw that, just the way he so logically, I was just like, oh, I see how the culture's been bamboozled here.
Yeah.
How did you go from a Christian-based ethos to where we are today? I mean, I think a lot of Christians are just shaking their head going, how did we get here?
And they don't know what to do about it, right?
Correct.
Because like you said, most of us, even yourself, raised in a somewhat atheistic environment, still the last vestiges of creationism and a Christian culture was still ripe in society, and you were the beneficiary of a lot of that stuff, right?
Yep.
And so a lot of times Christians just kind of let it slide because, well, society seems to still be operating pretty well. So
yeah, and a danger I see with people like, let's say, Jordan Peterson or some conservative-minded people, right?
Yep.
Because Jordan's not a Christian.
I don't think so. No.
And he's a full-fledged evolutionist. I've seen him present, and he's always talking about evolution. That's his, I think so many people saw that one video where he was kind of weeping and talking about Jesus, and, we were like, oh man, he's but now he seems to have backed off a bit, and he's talking about the Bible as these, these good concepts, but it's not real history.
Mythologically true.
There you go. So he's touting the Bible as this source of authority, but it's not real authority.
Yeah.
You can't just read the words as plainly written. And so as people are like, we need to get back to conservatism in the Bible, but not in a real belief, I think that's a danger.
That's very dangerous. Or cultural. Let's go back to cultural Christianity. That kind of thing.
Yeah.
So you, what did you spend those early years of, or your teenage years and into marriage? What were you doing then? You said music and studying martial arts. And whatnot?
I got.
You had a full-time job, I'm sure.
Yeah, well, I mean, on and off. I was in a band and making money that way, but not much. It's like the joke.
Starving artist.
Yeah, what's the difference between a musician and a large cheese pizza? Large cheese pizza can feed a family of 4. Yeah. Anyway, I had work. I eventually got into like decorating, painting, that kind of stuff. That was kind of my trade. It was pretty easy to learn. You didn't need a lot of tools.
Yep.
That kind of thing. And everybody always needed painting, so that was kind of what I did.
In the meanwhile, still always studying and learning and reading books and whatnot.
Yeah, different things that interested me. So it was about 26 by the time I actually got. My mindsets. I really got challenged as far as evolution went. And I didn't get saved immediately, but what happened is I got invited to this non-denominational church service. And the only reason I showed up is because the guy who was speaking, I knew him casually from business. And he was a pretty smart guy. And so I showed up with a clipboard, very skeptical, and I expected what I was going to experience was what I'd seen on Sunday morning TV.
Yeah.
Big hair and cheesy smiles and shouting out Bible verses.
Today.
Yeah. But he'd actually studied medicine, and he'd read Origin of Species, and he very systematically, did some apologetics. I didn't even know what the word meant back then. And I've always been a fairly linear thinker, and I was like, wow. I'd never heard anybody challenge the concept of evolution. And so I didn't get saved, but I walked out of there going, wow, if evolution doesn't really hold water, what's the only option?
Interesting.
There's got to be a creator. Right? So now I was much more open to the concept of God, and I'm considering this, and that's why I said, in Hebrews, those who come to him must come to him by faith, but must believe he exists. Well, I'm a lot more open to the concept of God now, right? And so it was a year later I got invited, and it was the same guy speaking. And this time I was a little more humble, and I was like, okay, and again, he did some apologetics, but apologetics doesn't save anybody.
No,
it's the gospel that saves people.
I'm glad you mentioned that.
So, he goes through saying, and then he starts talking about God's law, and this is what I was saying. I felt conviction, lying, cheating, stealing, blaspheming, all this kind of stuff. I honestly felt just crushed. My palms, I literally was my palms are sweating. I felt conviction. And then he used this great analogy that I've used ever since. So it's not mine, but it's simple. I'm sure a good seasoned theologian could tear it to pieces because it's not pure theology, but it was exactly what I needed to relate to the gospel. And he said, picture when you're born, there's this invisible camera that comes into being.
Okay.
And it starts recording everything you do, everything you say, everything you think, right? All those things you do when you don't think anybody's watching. And when you die, you're standing in front of God, and it's kind of like this scenario, right? It's like, hey, how you doing? Why don't we sit down on these nice cozy chairs here? What we're going to do is play the DVD of your life, and we're going to watch it together, you and me, the Creator, God, in slow motion, and see if you're good enough to be with me in eternity. And I'm sitting there. It was like, I'm imagining this. It's like a bad movie. I'm like, no. I wouldn't have wanted to do that with my mom.
Exactly.
Let alone God. And he said, but see, if you're a Christian at that point, it's like Jesus comes along and says, no, Father, don't play his DVD. Play my DVD
righteousness of God,
instead as a substitute.
Amen. And
make your judgment based on my life, the perfect sinless Son of God. And I was just like, oh. Before that, Jesus was a swear word to me.
Yeah. Right?
And I'd never understood the mission Christ had, why he came, why he had to, and it just all fell into being, and I got saved, and my wife got saved at the same time, and at the same meeting, and of course, you don't realize what a blessing that is until you meet a couple where they're not both on the same page and all that stuff. So yeah, I got home because I was actually away. I was in, I think it was Portland. I got back home to Cambridge, Ontario, and I had this tract, What Just Happened, 3 steps, and a Bible somebody had given me. And I remember sitting in my bathtub reading this tract going, yeah, what just happened? Something just happened. I didn't really understand my conversion experience.
Yeah.
I knew I was changed. And I started reading the Bible, and I always joke with people. I said, guess where I started? Genesis.
Makes sense.
Because it's a book. Every other book I read, I started in the beginning. I wasn't educated enough to start in John or Matthew or whatever.
Yeah.
And so I just started reading it, and I was like, oh, okay, God created in 6 days and rested on the 7th. And that's the renewing.
Your faith became real simple.
Yeah, that's the renewing of your mind.
Yeah.
Right? And so when I started encountering Christians that were having severe doubts about Genesis, it just really surprised me. It's like, you're going to put your trust, your eternal soul, in the hands of Jesus, but because of what some scientist says about the age of the earth, you're going to say, well, no, it can't really mean what it means. And the other thing is I could make the connections fairly quickly, because I've heard so many Christians say things like, well, Cal, the age of the earth, that doesn't matter about salvation and Jesus and all that stuff. And I'm like, okay, I know where you're coming from on a kind of a surface level. It's not a direct salvific issue. But let's just think this through. If Jesus, the Creator, as we see revealed in Colossians, right, used billions of years to create, what's the evidence of the billions of years that the scientists are saying? Well, the rock layers, right? Okay.
Disprove them.
Yeah, that proves billions and millions and billions of years. Okay, so where are you going to add that to the Bible? You're not going to add it in after Adam and Eve coming on the scene, because then you've got a chronology there, begat. So the only place to put it logically is in the 6 days of creation.
They stretch each day out to millions of years, perhaps.
And we've all heard that kind of stuff.
Or it's all just metaphoric of some way.
So, okay, now at the end of the creation, after 6 days of creating, whatever you believe those are, God says he saw everything, and it was very good. So that's the creation narrative, whatever you believe about those days, right? We just leave it there. Okay, let's jump to the New Testament. You look in the book of Acts, it says, Jesus of Nazareth went about doing good things. Oh, well, okay. Even non-Christians can, if they know a little bit of the Bible, they know what good things Jesus did. He healed the crippled hand, and then the guy couldn't walk, and so he healed the infirmities, right? He healed diseases like leprosy, blindness. He even brought people back to life and calmed a life-threatening storm. So what were the things Jesus did? Well, he healed death, he healed infirmity, disease, all that kind of stuff. Okay, so why do we know what Jesus did was good? Well, because what he fixed was bad, right? We know death and infirmity and disease is bad. Okay, so let's go back to the creation then. If God did use billions of years to create, then he used those millions and billions of years. Well, the rock layers are supposedly the evidence of millions and billions of years, but what's in the rock layers?
Death upon death upon death.
We actually see disease in the fossil record, like cancer. Mm-hmm. So now you're saying Jesus used billions of years of death, suffering, pain, disease, cancer to create, and at the end of it, he called it very good. But then in the New Testament, he's fixing the things that he used to create, which were very good, but they're bad, but they're... And so, in my estimation, I just don't think a lot of Christians have thought these things through. And so, too often, they're like, well, maybe God used evolution. Maybe God used millions of years. And they're not really thinking things through. And I can tell you that atheists have. Many professing atheists today grew up knowing their Bible very well, and they know that it simply doesn't make sense to believe that the character of Christ is one.
The evolution and creation just can't fit together.
No, and I use many quotes from.
Well, I like that you said that apologetics is not going to save anybody, because apologetics convinced you that there was perhaps a God, or it was at least enough to kind of tip you over the edge to make you reconsider. Yeah. But when you got saved, you didn't need evidence and proof and validation from God that he existed and that he, here's the science textbook, or here's the the observational science to prove it, but you simply believe that he is, and then you read the book like, okay, God, I trust you.
Right.
And
so
then you could find...
it was the removal of stumbling blocks. It was, destroying those strongholds. We read passages like that in Scripture, right? I had these stumbling blocks. I had these strongholds in my head.
Ideologies.
And when I got them smashed through apologetics, then I became open to belief in God.
Yeah.
Right? So there is this process, and I know theologians are going to argue till Jesus comes back and tells us exactly how it all works, as to how that process works. But we do see these things in Scripture. I can attest to it personally, that I was very cold to the things of God. Like, you want to go to my Bible study? No, I'm good. You want to go to church? No. And if you kept bugging me, guess what I came up with? Okay, man. So you're one of those guys, eh? Okay, so that story about the guy in there who got 2 of every animal on a boat, and there are millions of species of animals on the planet. Must have been a big boat, eh? Hardy har har. I would attack.
Yeah.
I just, by osmosis, I knew to attack. Genesis. Oh, you believe in a talking snake, do you?
Yeah.
Today I'm more like, yeah, it's a lot more plausible to believe that the most powerful demon ever created could possess a snake and cause it to talk than to think a bunch of monkeys sat around for millions of years and taught themselves how to talk. But, I just knew naturally how to attack Christians. And to me, it was just like they just appeared dumb. I apologize to anybody out there who might be offended by that. I'm just telling you how I used to think.
I did say before that sometimes it's good for us as Christians to be simple-minded. The Bible talks about how he came for the weak and the beggarly and those that are not, to confound those that are. Like a lot of times Christians are not wise, really noble, right? Like not scientists and stuff like that. Very simple-minded folks. They just trust God and they believe God. And so sometimes they can be portrayed as kind of dumb and not really thinking things through, and some of them don't.
Right.
And then somebody who actually thinks gets saved, and they're like, actually, folks, you guys believe some really good stuff.
That's
like, there's reason to believe what you believe.
Exactly.
And that's where we're supposed to give a reason for the hope that lies within us, right? That's the whole apologetics.
And I think making things simple, the adage is a good teacher makes complicated things simple, or a bad teacher makes, uncomplicated things very complicated. And I think whether it's Brazilian Jiu-jitsu or whether it's science or whatever topic, that's really what it is. And so I think we do a good job, instead of saying, well, if the scientists say it, it must be true. Okay, but I grew up reading dinosaur books and reading about fossils. And here's your classic example. The fish is going along and it dies and it sinks to the bottom. And then it's going to get covered slowly over millions of years and turn into a fossil, because the sedimentation rates that we observe today, you might lay 1 or 2 varves down per year. But I never thought, but when I went to visit my aunts in Newfoundland and I was sitting at the end of the dock looking over the edge and there was a dead fish down there, it wasn't going to sit there for millions of years.
It's going to rot
Hundreds
away,
of thousands. All the other fish were
or...
chomping. So the practicality, that's why I use examples like 30-foot tall trees or soft tissue found in dinosaurs now. Over 150 times they've found soft tissue. Well, the 3rd episode of the Grok AI videos.
It's not out yet?
It's coming out this Friday.
Okay.
I actually talk about soft tissue in dinosaurs and just get the AI to conclude, okay, well, how could soft tissue last for millions of years? They can't.
No.
Chemical decomposition rates don't allow for it. So, I think that's one thing that the Answers in Genesis ministry can do, is empower Christians to understand you don't need to be a scientist. You just need a few things sorted out and understand, okay, big flood 4,400 years ago
answers a lot of questions.
Most of that's, and
this
like
is where you were saying, after you got saved in the tub reading the Bible, you said things started putting 2 and 2 got together pretty quick in your mind, where you're like, oh, there's answers for all of this stuff.
Exactly. Ange and I, my wife, we were walking yesterday, and I don't know why it got impressed into my mind, but it's identity crisis. This term kind of popped into my head, and I started thinking about our culture. And when you really think about it, our culture is in an identity crisis in the West. They don't know who they are. They don't know who they are in Christ. But they can't even answer simple questions like, well, where do I come from? What's the meaning of life? What happens when I die? Am I a man? Am I a woman? How's a guy...
Is that subjective?
Is that subjective? I'm a guy, so am I supposed to hold the door open for the lady? Or is that just, am I being a misogynist? Or everybody's just confused.
Everything's
now.
Up for question too.
How did that happen? If you teach the story of evolution, that we all just evolved from pond scum. And before that, of course, there was a big uncaused explosion. That's how the stars and galaxies formed. And the Earth was a hot molten blob, and it got gradually cooled down. It got covered in about 70% water. And part of that geological evolution would be the rock layers with the dead things in there. And first life came through chemicals and then through natural selection. And we all just arrived here. Nothing means anything.
Nothing. No, there's no meaning, no purpose.
You're trying to pin Jello to the wall. And so I think that's what you see in the culture today, is this cultural collapse where nobody knows anything for sure about anything.
Are you seeing what I'm seeing too, that there seems to be a bit of a revival in actual thinking again too? There's a whole movement of people who are like, let's check to see what traditional values were actually about.
Yes, I am seeing that, yeah. And of course, I would say the progressive left, they're kicking and fighting and screaming against that big time. And that's because the leaders of those movements, not the blue-haired, whatever, the average person, guy, gal running around that believes in that stuff, but the leaders of those movements, the heavy communistic, socialistic thinkers, they already knew how to take down Christianity. Mm-hmm. You have to undermine the authority of the Bible. And when they knocked out Genesis, that's what actually happened.
For sure.
Because from that moment onward, any Christian who said, yeah, but thus saith the Lord, yeah, but that's what you say about Genesis, and we know that's not fact either.
True, yeah.
That's why we've arrived where we are.
So how long into your Christian life before you started sharing this stuff or ministering in some way? And then how did your ministry actually get off the ground?
It wasn't that long. I think what happened, as soon as I saw that video by Ken, I put the pieces together. Oh, wait a sec. It wasn't just me that got duped into this kind of stuff. I'd started going to church. I'd started to see the young people in the church, get to about grade 10. All of a sudden, they're teaching evolution and world religions. World religions, what do you hear? Well, people groups from around the world, they had to explain their existence, so they invented gods. Over in science class, and now we know we all evolved from pond scum over millions of years.
This is not a religious class. This is pure science.
Yeah, and it started, I could see young people starting to fall, and all of a sudden I went, oh, I see. This is a bigger picture. And so I started, it just kind of happened. I would get invited to different, like church, a youth group, or to speak. I got invited on a TV show. It was like a 2 a.m. talk show, Christian talk show. And the episodes that I was on, not because of me, but I think the topic outperformed, that kind of stuff. So just started getting invited to church, finally got involved with a professional ministry that was doing apologetics, and that was kind of my career.
There you go. And now, how many years have you been doing pretty much strictly apologetics?
About 25 years now.
25 years.
Yeah. So
that's incredible. And your ministry now has gone back to, you do live presentations in your conferences and whatever else.
Yeah. So if I'm invited to come and speak at a church or a conference, I'm willing to do that all across Canada, sometimes internationally. And then, of course, the video production, which has really taken off and reached millions. I think we're approaching 21 million views now on our channel, which is a real blessing, and the Lord's used that.
And you're kept alive just through donations, some revenue from the YouTube channel, probably.
Yeah,
minimal.
I mean, you're not going to get a ministry to survive through that. But yeah, it's mostly just people that really appreciate the ministry and understand the impact that it's had, either in their own lives, they've seen the fruit, or they just understand the whole ministry goal, to uphold the authority of the Word of God. That's it.
And now, just back to your personal life, you've been married for close to 30 years?
I'll be married for 40 years next year.
40 years? Well, I was way off.
Yeah, I was born in...
That makes more sense.
Well, I mean, I'm not born. I was married when I was 19.
Okay, so same as me. I was expecting kind of in the mid-20s or something.
Yeah.
But even then I was off by a bit.
Well, like I said, I'll be 59 next year. So.
Yeah. And you have...
I have three children and 13 grandchildren.
13 grandchildren.
Yeah.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I won't take up any more of your time, but I really appreciate you spending time here, and I think this is going to kind of unlock certain thinking in people's minds, right? To realize that we don't have to be intimidated or fearful of what the facts out there or the consensus science is.
For sure. And if you do get feedback where you'd like to go through some questions or something like that, I'd be welcome to come back, or I'd be happy to come back anytime.
Right on. I appreciate it.
Okay.
Thanks, Cal.
Awesome.